Welcome back to the Autoblog Podcast. I'm Greg Migliore. Joining me today is our news editor, Joel Stocksdale, freshly back from the shores of Lake Michigan from the Chicago Auto Show. How are you, man?
Doing all right. Feeling all rested up after the big-ish. Well, we'll talk more about it, the Chicago Auto Show.
Yeah, it's good to have an auto show, that's for sure. It looks like the New York show is going to take place coming up in April, so fingers crossed for that. And then, hey, maybe we'll get into some of these great summer events that we all love to, hang out and spend some time at during the summer. We're going to talk about the cars we've been driving, the Nissan Pathfinder. Joel, you drove a 4-cylinder version of the Kia Stinger. That's kind of interesting. And I've spent some time recently in the Infiniti QX55. Then we'll close things out. I had an interview with the CEO of Hagerty. They recently went public, stock trading, and they're expanding into a lot of different areas. This, of course, is Hagerty. I caught up with the CEO, McKeel Hagerty. So stay tuned for that conversation. That'll be coming up in just a little bit. So let's jump right in. This is the first auto show we've had in a while. It's interesting that Chicago has actually been able to have 3 straight years of auto shows. They had one like literally 3 weeks before lockdowns in 2020. Then they were able to do kind of somewhat of an outdoor summer one in 21. And then, hey, this is the normal time they do it. This time it was more like more of a traditional sense, I would say, but lots of obviously safety protocols, precautions in place. You were on the floor. What did you think, Joel?
Yeah, so this was very close to being like a normal Chicago auto show. It was the traditional time, and this time it was actually fully assembled. That was one of the weird things last year was for the summer show. I don't know what happened. I don't know if it was they decided at the absolute last minute they were going to have media days, but while we were there listening to presentations and things, all the construction crews were still assembling displays, bringing in cars, or forklifts zipping by. The big bay doors were open, and so all the air conditioning was going out, so it was hot on the floor. But this year was pretty normal. Everything was finished up and ready to go. It was back in one of the normal halls. Usually the Chicago show is split into 2 halls that are right across from each other. But because this year was still kind of on the small side, they only set up in one hall. But in some ways that was kind of convenient for us as journalists because we didn't have quite so far to walk. We're going from one manufacturer to the other. A little bit disappointing, though, the fewer number of manufacturers than pre-COVID. So if you were going there for like public days, it was definitely a little bit smaller, maybe not quite as impressive. But for the most part, it felt surprisingly normal. And they had typical precautions in place, at least for the media days. They had to wear masks and have proof of vaccination, but otherwise, it really did feel like kind of a normal auto show. It was kind of fun.
What did you think of the new cars, the new reveals? What stood out to you?
Well, so that's the thing. There really wasn't much in the way of reveals. Jeep showed a black trim package for the Grand Cherokee. There was a firefighter special edition of the Ram 1500. Let's see. I think there were a couple other things, but you kind of get the idea that like there wasn't a whole lot going on this year. But we did have a couple of really good interviews with CEOs of Jeep and Ram, in which we learned some very interesting things. With Jeep, we found out that the long-rumored inline-6 engine will basically make its debut at the New York Auto Show. That's something that we've been waiting on for a long time. We're very curious to see what that will end up in. And with Ram, we learned that the electric truck that's coming in a few years is going to also be accompanied by a range extender model. So whether that'll be a gas engine that's functioning solely as a generator, or if it'll be able to connect to the wheels somehow. We're not entirely sure, but there will be a truck that's based on the electric truck that will have an internal combustion engine for it to go farther on a charge and be able to fill up quickly, which we think is probably going to be really useful for buyers that actually want to tow a lot, because one of the biggest drawbacks for an electric truck is that while it can tow a huge amount, and it can do so fairly easily thanks to all that torque, it can't do it very far. When you start towing something, it cuts range drastically. So to have some kind of onboard generator that you can keep topped up with gasoline would mean that you could still have an electric truck most of the time, but still also be able to tow things.
It's interesting. Ram is going to be maybe not the last to the party, but they're showing up later, but they're bringing some cool stuff. So I think that's going to be a very interesting move. Stellantis actually, I think, has a history of this. They're oftentimes not really on the cutting edge of things. Many times they're actually even behind the times. They will cling to things. You know, heck, the Viper was still available for purchase not all that long ago as a new car. But then when they get there, they usually have their own spin on it, which I really like. I think that's going to be interesting. And the inline six, that I think is going to be a very interesting engine. I think straight sixes in almost any application are very compelling. It's kind of old school, but done well, like what BMW and Mercedes do. Those are just, in my mind, gems of power plants. So I'm really, really excited to see what happens with that and how they use it, and then how it maybe proliferates throughout the Stellantis lineup. So,
and before I forget, there are a couple other reveals. Ford brought the Bronco Everglades to show off, which is yet another kind of off-road themed trim level for the truck. It's basically a 4-cylinder Sasquatch, but they throw in a bunch of extra off-road bits. They add the metal front bumper, a 10,000-pound Warn winch. They also add a couple unique upgrades, including a snorkel, and they changed up the vents on the axles and transmission so that the whole thing has an extra 3 inches of water fording ability compared with a regular Sasquatch. It also gets some neat graphics on the side, and it looks pretty cool. And there's also another Heritage Edition Ford GT. This one is red with white stripes, and it's themed after a special lightweight version of the original Ford GT40 that was developed by a British racing team.
that's very cool. It's almost like a forgotten chapter in the Ford GT's history. There's so many famous drivers who, piloted the GT back in the mid to late 60s, that this is really cool. And the scheme is, it's very eye-catching, let me put it that way. And the GT is serving its kind of final run out here. I believe it's like the final 250 units are out there, or will be out there. So I think this is a good way to, kind of continue the send-off. You also got to see things like the Chevy pickup truck, the electric Silverado, which, while not exactly a reveal, this is, for all intents and purposes, the first time most humans have seen it in the sheet metal. What was that like?
Yeah, I think it looks really neat. And I think it's interesting the differences between it and the F-150 Lightning. The Lightning, while it does have a lot of unique componentry compared to the internal combustion one, it's still very much based on that truck. It's still body on frame. It still uses basically the same cab and bed. Whereas the Silverado is a ground-up design, entirely designed around being an electric truck and taking advantage of some of those things. And it shares stuff with the Hummer EV. And you get interesting features like the fact that it's electric. They've been able to change kind of the cab packaging so that it's more spacious inside, and move the cab forward so that you still get plenty of bed space. And it's got the midgate. It's really interesting, and it's got very distinct styling from the internal combustion one.
I think it looks outstanding. I really do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's neat, and I think it may even be a good thing, really, for both manufacturers, because each one is taking a slightly different tack on the electric truck, and so kind of depending on what you're looking for, there's a truck for you. It'll be interesting to see if that bears out in sales. Granted, it'll be hard to compare that, considering that the Silverado doesn't go into production until next year, and it's only being offered in a stripped out fleet version and a like fully loaded $100,000 version right off the bat, with additional models coming the following model year. So there is still actually a little bit of a wait for the Silverado, and especially if you want one of the affordable ones. It'll start at around $40,000 when they have the full range available, but that won't be until the 2024 model year.
Until the electric...
No, 2025 model year, sorry.
Yeah, no, so that's coming up. I mean, granted, 25 is really like calendar year 24, and it's already 22, if you could believe that. But that's still a little bit of a stretch, considering you can order a Lightning. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, there's a bit of a, I'd say, a delay, if you will, or a lag in between the two sort of, electric trucks that will, I'm sure, be arch rivals. It's interesting, too, because until we start to see to a point where the electric market starts to grow, and I think that's where you see more of a maturing and maybe more of like an adoption among buyers, it's going to be kind of a zero-sum game, and as it kind of ebbs and flows, you're going to have Ford come on, then you'll have Chevy come on, and then it'll be interesting to see how the sales play out. Will all the Ford buyers get their electric trucks? Then Chevy will come in and their Chevy buyers will get it. Or obviously the idea here is to get new buyers involved, into these things. And, that generally comes with just increased, adoption of electric vehicle technology. So we'll see.
And it's also interesting with how late Silverados are going to be coming out that Ram really won't be that far behind, because they're targeting 2024 for their electric Ram models to come out.
That's a great point. Chicago Auto Show is one of my favorite shows because I like the pizza. I will do a quick informal ranking here of all the pizzas. The Chicago show is really the podcast we do this on. I like Detroit pizza. Got to put that first. I have to. I generally put Chicago second. I like that thick, cheesy. It's like a casserole. Some people from New York probably would say. I'll go with New Haven is my number third. It's kind of an East Coast style. It's like a riff on New York. I spent some time in New Haven a couple summers ago and just really liked it. It's great with like an IPA or something and a salad. I'll put New York a very competitive fourth. I like it. I just think it's very ubiquitous. And I like all kinds of pizza, homemade pizza, freezer pizza. I think it's all good, but just Chicago Auto Show, that's my informal rankings. What are your top 2 or 3, Joel?
I think pretty similar. I think Detroit just narrowly edges out Chicago for me. And for Chicago pizza, I have a fondness for like the stuffed deep dish that Giordano's does. But I was surprised a number of years ago when my dad and I visited Detroit once for the auto show. We stopped by a place called Pizzapopolis that does Giordano style stuffed deep dish, and I was extremely impressed with their stuff. And I still get their pizza now and then when I'm looking for a Chicago fix. But yeah, so Chicago is kind of a close second for me. New York is kind of a distant third for me.
I just like a thin crust pizza to me is like not necessarily what I'm looking to do. It can be tasty. It is tasty for sure, but it's not quite when I want a pizza. I like the cheese. I like the crust. I like all of that. So, and I would agree with you. Pizzapopolis is very good. Maybe every couple of weeks, maybe once a month, I will, take a drive out to, there's only 1 or 2 in this exact area, but I make it my business to head out there, especially if I have a nice press car, it's a good reason to take it and you can put it right back in the oven and away you go. And since we're plugging pizza, we might as well plug what we're wearing. I am wearing an Autoblog long sleeve t-shirt. It's quite comfortable. You're wearing an Autoblog hat. Now you might be wondering, where can I get that stuff? It's Redbubble. They are a site that sort of they're a t-shirt maker, if you will. But if you search for Autoblog on the Redbubble site, you will find us. You will find our gear. It's pretty cool stuff. Great for any of your gifting needs. And I mean, hey, we work here. We still buy the stuff. So I just had to put out a plug for that. The Autoblog merch store. Let's move on over to what we've been driving. you spent some time in the Nissan Pathfinder Platinum, right? And I think this was your ride to the Chicago show. Was this your first time behind the wheel, and what did you think of it?
Yeah, this was my first time with the Pathfinder. I had driven its fancier cousin, the Infiniti QX60. Had to double check that for a minute. And I was really, really impressed. That thing was a rockin' road trip vehicle. Really quiet, really spacious interior. The seats were great. They were wide and they were deep, and they had like soft but very supportive cushioning. That it was very much easy chair kind of territory. It was very comfortable. Forward visibility was excellent. Was really well equipped. This one had a heated steering wheel, heated seats, wireless CarPlay, wireless Android Auto, wireless phone charging. It was really good to drive. The engine was very smooth, very quiet, nicely isolated from the cabin. Ride quality was really good. Very smooth and steady. But just firm enough that it's not like that it didn't roll too much and it didn't feel kind of yacht-like. Steering surprisingly actually has some feedback to it, which was a big and very pleasant surprise for such a large SUV. Yeah, I came away extremely impressed with it and very pleased. And I think I've finally found a kind of three-row SUV that rivals kind of our current favorites, the Telluride and the Palisade.
That's interesting. I would put it in my top maybe 10. I'm not sure I'd give it quite the high praise you would, but I did like it. For me, it was interesting to see that they're really steering into the rough and tough off-road idea of the Pathfinder, which is a bit of a return to some of its previous generations. Although really the last few years, it's definitely been an SUV. They even say things like four-wheel drive when I think it's really more like all-wheel drive, but so be it. I drove one that even had kind of like an outdoorsy vibe. I think it was a shade of green with a really nice brown interior. I don't think it was the Platinum because I did drive it. This was last year in the summer, actually. But, it's a little bit of work to drive. Like you said, it has that confident stance and it handles, pretty well for a big SUV. But it also it's a little bit of work to drive is what I would say. Yeah, I'm okay with that. It's a large, SUV. It should be a job. You should be paying attention to it. So, I mean, overall, I think it's definitely competitive, but the segment is also very competitive. So, yeah. I mean, as a road trip vehicle, though, I mean, for sure. I mean, that's a comfy ride right there, all the way out to Chicago.
Yeah, and I got around kind of mid to high 20 miles per gallon on the highway, and
respectable.
Yeah, I really like it. And mine had that really nice brown leather interior. It looks really good, and I like that the controls are really straightforward and easy to use. It's got physical buttons and knobs everywhere. The touchscreen infotainment system works pretty well. I will say, it did feel kind of reluctant to get up and go and downshift when you really wanted to get going. But otherwise, the 9-speed automatic transmission that they put in is such a giant improvement over the old CVT that they had been using. It's just a lot smoother and more comfortable. The CVT it had all of those kind of bad classic CVT attributes, just kind of buzzy and never really settled down, and never quite felt as connected as you'd like it to. So
I think that was a smart move on their part to really move over to that. Because, I mean, CVTs are sort of like the best of, best at being like a vanilla cookie or something. It is what it is.
Yeah, and they got an extra 1,000 pounds of towing capacity out of it too when they just went to the automatic.
Yeah, definitely some practical gains there, which, again, I mean, in a segment like this where there's a lot of different things you can buy to travel either in comfort and style for practical purposes like towing your boat or whatnot, you need to have something that gives you that, key differentiating sort of, mission. And, definitely if like you're looking for kind of a rough and tough SUV, I mean, the Pathfinder is something you're going to want to look at because it is, I think it's a much better product than it was before. Like the old Pathfinder was like prehistoric. And Nissan would tell you that. They kind of let that one live for a long time. And then this is their new generation. And it definitely has been pretty well received. It made it onto the into consideration for North American SUV of the year. It was at the the large event they host last fall. So I got to drive it there again as well. So it definitely is, received, pretty good recognition, I'd say, from the industry. And I would expect it'll sell pretty well too. I mean, this is what the people want, tow your boat, go camping, go to the mall, put your kids, put your dog, drive it yourself. This is America. It really does kind of tick all the boxes. So, yeah. Any other thoughts on the Pathfinder Platinum?
Well, not especially. I think the Pathfinder Platinum, it's up in like the high $40,000 range, and so it's right at the point where you may want to start thinking about possibly getting the Infiniti version because it starts right around in kind of the same area. But it also kind of depends on what you want as far as styling and as far as feature set, since the Pathfinder Platinum is pretty much fully loaded, and the Infiniti probably not quite as well equipped. And the Infiniti is much more kind of curvy, more road-going, like Lincoln luxury style kind of SUV, whereas the Pathfinder looks a little bit more rugged.
So speaking of Infiniti, we both have spent some time in the QX55. You actually did our first drive, looks like last year, and I'm in it right now. So it's kind of a reverse here where we can kind of flip between, frames of reference. But that's a good thing too. Sometimes you want to drive something and then let it marinate, see what somebody else thinks. I do think the Infiniti name game is still very confusing to me. We could do half a show on that. We won't, but the fact that the QX60 is something vastly different from the QX55 is, I don't know. It feels like you're really peeling that onion back kind of thinly. Let's put it that way. But mine, I think it comes in about $54,000, give or take. It's got the 2-liter 4-cylinder, 268 horsepower, 280 pound-feet of torque. It's got our friend the CVT on it, and all-wheel drive. It's a stylish play for sure. Mine's kind of a shade of dark, very dark blue with some not chrome, but bright work, if you will, accents, nice big wheels. Looks good. I mean, I enjoy taking it into, the preschool lot where, it's definitely a sea of minivans and SUVs. This kind of coupe crossover thing, it's got a little bit of an attitude, if you will. Honestly, I think Infiniti styling has been good for 10 years plus. I think they've been doing a great job with carving out an identity for, themselves and then, trying to get sales and bring in new customers. It drives fine. I wouldn't say there's anything really remarkable about it. The steering's just okay, but I can't really get a great feel for it just yet because there's still so much snow on the ground around here that even when the roads are plowed, air quote, you're still kind of correcting and fishtailing no matter what you do, frankly. But I do like the feel and the response of it. So there's that. It did just arrive a couple days ago, so I may talk about this again next week as I get more, more seat time. I think I might take it on a long road trip. So, we'll see how that goes. The downside is it's actually not the roomiest crossover. Let's put it that way. It's as far as family applications, it's a little tight. So there's that. But obviously, that going into it if you're, that's one of your purchase considerations. But just to kind of flash back from the first drive review perspective, you got to look at this just as this new thing. And I mean, how do you feel that take holds up? I mean, how are you feeling about the QX55 at this point?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I've really changed my opinion on it. I think it's a really, really good looking SUV. I think as far as coupified crossovers go, I think it's one of the better looking ones. The curvy looks they work really well on that Infiniti. And I think the interior looks really nice too. Infiniti has used like really good materials, and it's this very flowing organic shape to the interior. It's I like it quite a bit, especially kind of in higher trims. The one that I had, I think it was like kind of a pearly dolphin gray kind of color on the outside with a red and black interior. It's pretty spiffy, and for the segment, it's a pretty roomy SUV. Both it and the conventionally shaped QX50, which has the actual like normal hatchback. But I'm not a big fan of the way it drives. The 4-cylinder that's in it is a little bit rough, and having the CVT with it does it no favors. It's because it always has to keep it wound out if you're trying to go anywhere, and so you've got this kind of rough 4-cylinder just buzzing away at you. And it's also really bizarre because now the Nissan Rogue gets a 3-cylinder version of that engine, and for some reason it seems smoother in the Rogue, despite being a 3-cylinder. So I'm not really sure what happened with I guess it was Nissan's first variable compression engine, so maybe that has a little bit to do with it. I don't know. But it's not a powertrain that does it any favors. And the fact that it's not great handling wise, the steering is really numb and kind of light, and it's got a decent bit of body roll. Like it feels like it was definitely tuned for softness, which is fine, but I've driven enough cars that do good ride quality and good handling at the same time that it's a little bit disappointing. And the thing is that in this size segment, you have alternatives from like Audi, BMW, and Mercedes that do both things very well. So it's a very pretty car with a very nice interior that doesn't drive great. So I'm a little bit split. One of the positives, though, is that the Infiniti is a bit of a bargain compared with other alternatives in the segment. You'll save a couple grand buying the Infiniti over the others. So, like, if you just want something that looks nice and has a decent amount of space with a good interior, it's really not a bad way to go. But if you're looking for any kind of driving engagement, just steer clear.
I noticed and that engine is pretty good. The variable compression engine is, I mean, we even tested it a couple years ago for our Tech of the Year. Give it some consideration. It's really an interesting power plant. It really is. I think the power is actually pretty good, but it was kind of struggling to work with that, the CVT that's in it. And again, when I mentioned like the roads, there was a little bit going on there where it was like hunting kind of for how it wanted to calibrate, the power. And I would agree with you. I didn't love that, even though I can see how the parts of the engine that are good, I can sort of see that kind of shining through as well, despite the CVT. I'll say this. I think there's a little bit of perhaps a missed opportunity because 10 years ago, Infiniti did a great job of having great looking cars, really good power plants, and the cars were actually pretty good to handle and drive. They would win some comparison tests against, BMW, Mercedes, Audi back then. And it would always be like, in the buff books, it would be like, whoa, this Infiniti takes down the 3 Series or something, or gets really close but doesn't win. And I mean, we all know how those kind of tests can shake out, but still very, very competitive. That being said, I'll give the caveat here. It's a crossover. The fact that it's not amazing to drive, I'm actually okay with. That's an area I'm willing to, I think, make some compromises on, not from my personal fleet, but your average, crossover buyer is going to compare this against the GLC Coupe or the Audi Q5. And maybe if you lean a little more enthusiast, you go down one of those roads. If you're just, that thing looks great inside and out and it has how much space? Well, maybe you go with the Infiniti. And it's like, wait, it starts at like 47, 48. And the Germans are up more into the 50s with even a couple options. They get even more expensive. Like I can definitely see, people buy cars for the style. They buy cars for the roominess. I can definitely see that, how it's a mainstream car, if you will. So I think that, I think they're being mindful of the audience. And I think that also is where you can make some compromises with the CVT, because most enthusiasts are going to say CVT, keep on walking. Your average consumer might say, well, what's that? Oh, it's just the transmission. I don't care about that. Sure. All right. And, that's where I think, I think they're doing a good job. From looking at all the different, parts of the equation, the recipe that go into making a good crossover, I think there's a couple areas where this falls short, again, like the ride character and, again, some of the powertrain dynamics. But overall, I think it's definitely like a win, if you will, for Infiniti, and it could be the right crossover for the right consumer. So we'll see. But then when I do look at the competitive set, which if you're listening to this, you should check out Joel's article from, wow, this was in March. I can't believe it's already a year later from March. But you did a nice job of laying out the Q5 Sportback, the X4, I forgot about that. There's a lot of different things in this segment, plus a variety of other things, whether they're from a luxury brand or from a premium brand. Like if you're looking for kind of just a nice crossover and you want to spend 50 grand, basically every car company on the face of the earth will take your money. So there's a lot of choices out there. And that's where it can be tricky for Infiniti to kind of cut through the clutter too, I think. So,
something that I kind of wish an Infiniti would do. They've been, for better or for worse, kind of a technology forward brand. For better, you've got that really neat variable compression engine, which, as I noted, the 3-cylinder version of it in the Rogue is actually very nice. You can read a first drive review I did of that on Autoblog. And for worse, there was the steer-by-wire system that was really terrible, just really, really bad. That I'm surprised and a little bit confused that they haven't launched a full electric model yet, especially when you've got the resources of both Nissan and Renault that have been doing electrics longer than most automakers. I'm surprised that there's not like an Infiniti version of the Aria on the way, because I think that would be a great way for them to kind of start, I don't know if rebuilding their identity is quite the term, but like something that would make them kind of stand out again. Especially because they've got the engineering know-how in that company that I think they could do it pretty easily and probably do it pretty well. And if you couple Infiniti's styling with an electric car, I think you could have a real stunner.
I think that makes a lot of sense. That's where you see a lot of like Tesla and some of the other, like primary electrified automakers, if you will, where their mission is all electric transportation, like Fisker, past and present. They do lean really into the design. And I think it could go science experiment or it could just go beautiful. And I think that could definitely be a play. I quite agree with you. It could be an area where Infiniti could, because the cars already are head turners. But then if you say, well, hey, like, look at this and it's electric. Well, hey, now, what do you have here? So side note, I actually drove the steering by wire at a racetrack in, I want to say, Tennessee with Sebastian Vettel back in the fall of 2013. And it was funny. He was actually a really cool dude to like drive around with. And, you'd ask him what mode he wanted to put it in. He'd be like, yeah, I'm going to put it in comfort. You're like, comfort? And he's like, well, yeah, I'm not a maniac. I just want to drive the car. And he's like, you guys keep wanting me to put it in like Sport or Sport Plus or whatever. And he was a spokesman for sort of Infiniti as part of the Red Bull partnership at the time. It was a cool press trip. We ended up going down to the U.S. Grand Prix in Austin. So drank a lot of Red Bull and other things that weekend. So it's pretty fun.
Yeah, that was a weird time for Infiniti because that's when they became like one of the title sponsors for the Red Bull team and had Vettel as like their special like spokesperson and like supposedly like helping with some driving dynamic stuff. And I think this was also kind of about the time that either they had moved or were going to move the Infiniti headquarters to Hong Kong for reasons that I've never understood.
Well, that's when Johan de Nissan was running Infiniti at that point. And that was kind of his move. We were joking in the industry as he takes over the company and moves the headquarters. That's what I think he did with Cadillac.
Yeah, because they moved Cadillac to New York, and now Cadillac is back in Warren. They're like 3 miles from my house.
To be fair, I think the Cadillac move was like in the works before he took over. He kind of made a point of saying, well, hey, this wasn't exactly my idea. But, so it goes. Cool. Well, those are the cars we've been driving. Let's shift gears. We're going to catch up with McKeel Hagerty. He's the CEO of Hagerty. A lot going on with them. It has become way more than just insurance. They do all sorts of things right now. If you're an enthusiast, you probably use one of the many different things they do. Maybe you get their magazine. How's it going, McKeel? How is everything?
Oh, great. Thank you. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. Lots of things going on in the car world, the world in general, and of course, the collector space. You guys are really, I think, at the forefront of many of the things, the changes we're seeing in the enthusiast landscape. First of all, let's kind of start off with just some general trends. What are you seeing right now as the enthusiast landscape takes shape in 2022?
Well, the car world, the enthusiast landscape is really red hot, and it's red hot driven by a number of things. We're seeing it in sales, we're seeing it in evaluations, we're seeing it in all sorts of energy around the media space. So it's growing from a transactional standpoint. Values are going up, and it's getting younger. At least the owners are getting younger, and the cars are getting newer. So those are the highlights, and it's painting a pretty good picture if you're into the car world.
I think it's interesting when you look at, values and interest by decades. Growing up, coming up in like the 80s and 90s, it seemed like you'd always hark back right to the 50s, just because frankly, that's how all of like culture was at that point. And now what you're seeing maybe is you get a little bit older, some gray hair and such, suddenly the 70s and 80s are quite far away. It's different. It's a new generation of collector. And you're seeing people who do have some income looking to spend money on those cars, perhaps as opposed to, the Duesenbergs or things like that. So what are you seeing, I guess, is that, it's like people get older and they age and, the preferences and tastes do sort of evolve.
Yeah, I think there's always been this kind of golden ageism, if you will, in the car world where people just sort of picked an era and said, that's the best era. That was the era. That's the only collectible era. That's the only era of cars that are going to be highly sought after by people with means. And you're right. Like when I first got into this world, it was the 90s when I started taking over this little family business in northern Michigan. And certainly that was an era when it was an older generation, very interested in 50s cars. It wasn't that pre-war cars weren't important, but 50s cars were the hot thing. And that's how you'd see at car shows and at auctions. And then it wasn't that long after, about a decade after that, when it was the muscle cars. Muscle cars really took off, exploded in a positive sense, right? The market exploded. And we saw that huge run up to the middle sort of 2000s, and now we've moved beyond it. Like you said, it's cars that are newer. Cars in the 70s were considered to be before kind of lower quality. It was the beginning of environmental regulations and other regulations sort of suppressing maybe the quality or performance of cars, even though there were some notable standouts. But when you got up into 80s cars, where high performance cars and other cool cars were more mass produced and really produced in much greater numbers to them. As I look at now, when people say, what do you think about the car world today? And I said, if there's a golden age ever, it's right now. Some of these storied brands are building thousands of cars per year where they used to build hundreds. It's an exciting time to be in the car world. And by eliminating that golden ageism, you realize just how big this car market is and how vibrant it is.
Now, you talk about how your family company has grown since, you really joined it in the 90s. And boy, the 90s are starting to seem like they were a little farther away now, too. It's really been quite a road for you guys, culminating with, a stock listing last year. Tell me what that was like to experience that growth, to lead that growth. And what does that stock listing enable you guys to do going forward?
Oh, thank you. It was last year was an extraordinary year getting ready to go public as a company. We were a closely held family business from its inception back in the 1980s, and it's fun to work as a smaller business and watch it grow and hit that first milestone of maybe 100 employees and then 200 and then 500, 1,000 and beyond, and grow into other countries besides the United States, and all of that was really fun to do. And it's just that the pleasure of a job well done in and of itself, growing it, not just a company, but a brand, because we're really proud of the way we built our brand in the automotive space and expanding beyond insurance. But when you really think about the long term of where we were trying to go, when we started realizing this is a much bigger world, it's international, it's global in nature, there are lots of other opportunities for a company like ours to take advantage of. Ultimately, it's like, well, how do you take that next leap in scale? And there are lots of ways to do it. As a CEO, as a company, you can take on debt, you can bring in investors. Our approach of going public was, I felt really threaded a lot of needles, which is to allow the founding owners to remain in as founding owners and continue to have high influence over the company, but also to invite team members and be able to recruit new people and to use a new form of currency in the form of stock to be able to attract high level talent, and also to just get after some of the big dreams and projects that we had going forward. So we went officially public. I think it was first listing day was actually December 3rd, 2021, and we rang the bell at the New York Stock Exchange on December 6th. And already this year we started making some announcements about some new things that we're doing, like moving into a pretty heavy investment in the marketplace space with an investment in the Broad Arrow Group, a newly formed marketplace company. So you can kind of see some of the things that we've been thinking about, and going public is helping make it happen.
One of the things that I think is interesting that you guys have really been ramping up in the last year is your involvement with the different concours. The one that really piqued my interest, because I've watched it change a lot, is the one here in Michigan, Meadowbrook. Then it was out in Plymouth, and then looks like next year it's going to be down at the Detroit Institute of Arts, which sounds like an amazing, location. It's a great museum. So I think it's just looking at all of these different events. What is the vision? How do you use these to reach, different, enthusiasts who, maybe don't even know what a concours is. They can't even say the word, but what's the vision there?
Well, the purpose of our company is to save driving and car culture for future generations. And I know it sounds kind of wonky or maybe, head in the sky, but I'm really serious about it. I mean, I know for you and for, so many of your, readers and listeners that, driving just means a lot to them. Cars are cool, driving, all the experiences around it. And the reason we talk about not just thinking that we need to be there to help support that activity of driving fun stuff long into the future, but car culture isn't just about this notion of a single person driving their car, kind of the man in the arena image of, they're just you working on your car and driving it. Car people gather, they gather at car events, they gather online, they read media, they compete in motorsport events, whether on an amateur or recreational or professional basis. So the car world has always had this social aspect, and we felt that car shows were something that were really an important part of our mission. And concours, we kind of started at the high end, with the Greenwich Concours, the Concours of America that we are moving to Detroit, and we're also moving it from the middle of summer to September. And then Amelia Island, which is really a wonderful, wonderful event that happens next month in March down in Fernandina Beach, Florida. And the idea here is by preserving some of these organizations and really championing the fact that we think all cars are cool, but some of them are just jewels and they need to be celebrated in a really high-end way. Concours are a great way to do that. We could invest in the events themselves, make them a little bit more modern, evolve the format of the events so that you still highlight the best of the best cars, but do it where you welcome more young people in, and youth and other things, create more media opportunities, better technology around them, all of that sort of thing. So the vision is by having kind of a portfolio of events, it allows you to put a little scale into them, create more value for sponsors. I've been a sponsor, Hagerty's been a sponsor of literally thousands of car events through the years. And I know what it's like to write those checks when you're a sponsor, just wanting to get your wares out there, your services out there. And we're going to be able to offer a lot more value to our sponsors by having more than just one event out there. So, look for more of this in our future, but that's the mission. And you're right. We're so excited about this new change of venue for that Concours of America, downtown Detroit. Is there a better, it's Motor City. And it's also, Motor City wasn't just about an industrial reality, an industrial city. There's always been really high culture between Motown, Detroit Institute of Art, Center for Creative Studies, all of that stuff happening right there. And we're going to be in the center of it. And we're super excited.
Yeah, that to really drill down on that, the Concours of America, that's going to be really, it's on Woodward Avenue, which is iconic in its own right. Inside the DIA, many of you who probably know about industry, they have a famous mural, Diego Rivera, talking about, working, manufacturing, coming of age for the industrial age. So it sounds pretty exciting. Parking's a little tricky down there. You've got a football at a baseball stadium, but I'm sure you guys will figure that out.
Well, actually, between CCS and the library, we're going to have great secure parking there. We've heard a lot of people say, I don't know if I want to go down and park. It's going to be great. It's going to be perfect. So we're really excited about that.
How do you guys sort of differentiate these different concours so that it's sort of like not just like the same thing, but in a different geographic location? How do you guys provide some differentiation? What's your plan on that front?
Well, car events all have different characters. You think of the great car events that happen around the world. I knew when I was, growing up reading car magazines, and I always wanted to go to Geneva, or I wanted to go to the Detroit Auto Show, or I wanted to go to New York or LA. And when I started going to them professionally and going to the concours events like this or racing events, we know they're all a little bit different. Some of it's culturally driven, just the geography of it. Sometimes it's the type of vehicles that they celebrate. You take Amelia Island, which is coming up here in March. Amelia Island's always kind of been the race car drivers' concours, where great concours, high-end cars are celebrated along with great race cars who are driven by some of the true legends of motorsport. And that needs to be preserved at Amelia Island. And we're super excited that we're going to have Chip Ganassi as our honoree this year and be celebrating his, not only his past career, but also really looking forward to, his current involvement in motorsport going forward. So that's important. When you think Detroit, you think Big Three, you think of all the innovation that's happened through the years. You think of that, the styling, the design, all that stuff that happened right around the Detroit area. And many people who will be the attendees at that event just coming in, buying tickets to show up. Those are people who work in the industry and they want to celebrate that stuff and go look at great designs in the past. So each one has its character. They need to be preserved, but then you have to evolve them. And that's where, I mentioned I'm pretty passionate about getting the next generation involved. So this doesn't mean dummying down the show. It we want to make them really family friendly. So we'll have kid zones and youth judging programs and other things that can bring families together around a car event rather than, no, mom and dad are going to go to the car event and the kids are going to stay at home. So it's just super important for me that we make, car events kid friendly and that we create on-ramps to the car world. So our kid zone at our events, it's racing simulators, it's little design competitions, it's all sorts of fun activities that kids can do. When we first did one of these at the Greenwich Concours late last year or last year, I guess it was, we moved it because of COVID. We had one of the actual Lightning McQueen cars. We had Jay Ward from, Disney Pixar there to talk to kids about animation and what the Cars franchise. So those are the things we need to do. Celebrate the great stuff, keep the geography and the special character of each event there and keep it special, but then evolve it for the next generation.
If you said Lightning McQueen was going to be at a car show, my son would be like, I'll be there any second. I'm there any second. And me too. I mean, who doesn't like cars, right? It's fun.
Well, I think it may be about the only car I took a picture in front of for my daughter. So there you go.
I'm curious, you talk about onboarding, on-roading the next, generation. There's a lot of things that are about to really change the industry, from electrification, which is changing the industry, to autonomous cars. I think the former, I don't necessarily think that impacts enthusiasts in any way, makes things different, but it can make them even better. Yeah. Autonomous, that changes things a little bit. And that may be where we start to steer into like infrastructure, transportation, rather than automotive enthusiasm. What's your take on these? I don't know if headwinds is the right way to spell it out. But I mean, how are you feeling about these changes as they
I think that's fair. I think it goes, and I get this question all the time. So I'm glad we're talking about it as, real car enthusiasts. Like you, I'm not threatened by, and I'm a big fan of the electrification of cars. I think it's a natural evolution. And if you've driven, and I'm sure you have, a higher performance version of a modern electric car, they're just outrageously good. The torque is instantaneous. They're fun. And I think they're just going to be a big part of the car world. Not only are you going to see more in the new car space, I think you're going to see some really thoughtfully done, great conversions of vintage cars into EVs that maintain the integrity of and styling and the coolness of the original car, but make them electric. And my view is, if the only way a future collector will drive a certain sort of vintage car is if it has an EV, if it's thoughtfully done, I'm all for it. So that's great. And by the way, we have a long, long history of repowering our cars through the decades. So anybody who gets kind of too precious about it, it kind of bugs me. But I also love internal combustion engine cars, and they're going to be around for decades and decades, long past my planning horizon. Even if you look at the most ambitious changeover to all electric new vehicle sales, we're a long way away, and it'll be decades down the road when internal combustion engine cars and EVs will have to be next to each other. You're right. Autonomous vehicles represents maybe a different kind of headwind. And I think it's as much about congestion in cities as it is about cars or transportation. You mentioned infrastructure, and I think you're right. I think there will be places long into the future that it might be pretty tough to drive a manually driven car. Think the center of Manhattan. I did an interview right after our listing in December, driving a BMW 2002 in the middle of Manhattan, and I will tell you, it was a handful. Trying to drive that car in traffic. So those are going to come soon enough. But I think our mission of saving driving is not meant to save the long commute in a city. Our mission of saving driving is to save the pleasure of driving, going out on a windy road, going out to a racetrack or a driving facility, going on a tour up Highway 1, or where we live in Michigan, like you said, Woodward, or M22 in Michigan. Those types of roads that were built for tourism, built for touring. And the best way, we believe, to see them is with your hands on the wheel, driving a cool car. So we're going to be advocating for that. Hagerty's going to be here fighting for that. And it's one of the reasons we went public. We don't think this saving driving and car culture is going to happen on its own. We wanted to really invest for that future long term.
So I imagine you have a number of cars that might be in your garage. What's your go-to daily driver? What do you drive on the weekends? How do you unwind with your automotive enthusiasm in a personal sense?
Well, thanks. Well, I live in northern Michigan, so it's the middle of winter right now. So if you don't have a great SUV, you are really making it hard on yourself. So my daily driver in the wintertime is, I have one of the Range Rover Sport SVRs, the 575 horsepower car. So with a nice set of 22 Nokians on it, it does pretty well in the wintertime, and it's a lot of fun. In the summer, I drive a variety of vintage cars, largely. I still have my very first car, my 67 Porsche 911S. I bought it when I was 13. And as I kind of tell people, I will grow old with that car. I may have lots of other cars, but I'll always have that one. And my goal is, that's usually the first one I bring out in the spring, kind of the last one I drive before the snow flies every fall. But I have a number of other cool cars, and that I've been kind of fortunate to collect. Shelby GT500. I have a E-Type Jaguar, Aston Martin DB4, and some muscle cars, and all sorts of. I like all sorts of things. My big sort of COVID touring gift for myself was a pre-war Bentley. I was so jealous of all those Bentley people driving around on the 100th anniversary of these pre-war cars that seem to go fast and be reliable, and they look super cool. So I found a really preserved example in the UK, and I enjoyed tooling around at that. And sometimes in a cool old car like that, going 35 miles an hour, 45, 55 is just plenty fast enough.
That sounds like a pretty good time. That sounds like a pretty good time. McKeel Hagerty, he's the CEO of Hagerty. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
That's all the time we have this week on the Autoblog Podcast. If you enjoy the show, please give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Android, wherever you get your podcasts. Please send us your Spend My Money. That's podcast@autoblog.com. Be safe out there, and we'll see you next week.